Shalom, welcome back. Today we're going to be focusing on Vayikra, chapter 11, and this is going to be talking about Kashrut. So if you actually watched the first Cartwheel video, this video is going to be a lot more in depth because of the topics we're going to be focusing on. So without further ado, let's pray. Adonai, I pray, help us to keep the Torah and the commandments, help us to walk in righteousness, holiness, justice, mercy, and truth, and help us to be obedient and help us keep the commandments and statutes all days of our life. Amen. Amen. So, Vayikra chapter 11, as we go into, we're going to be reading about the laws of Kashrut. Now, this isn't just the only section. There's obviously many sections in the Torah that speaks about it, but this section we're going to be focusing on. Vaydeber Adonai Moshe, and the Lord spoke unto Moshe, ve'el Aharon, unto Aaron, Le'emor, saying, Aleihim, unto them, Davru el ben Israel, speak unto the children of Israel. Now, like I said, many times people and stuff have taken this passage here of speak unto the children of Israel as if it's speaking only to Israel. Wrong. The reason why this is not speaking to Israel alone is because the laws of Kashrut have always been applied from the very beginning. This actually was given to Noach. Noach knew there were only animals that he was allowed to eat were the animals that are written here in Vayikra chapter 11. And a lot of times people get confused and they say, okay, I don't get it. I don't understand this and stuff. Why is it that the Torah doesn't talk about Kashrut until chapter 11? And yet over here in Genesis, it just talks about Noah and how he had knowledge of clean and unclean. Well, one of the biggest false theologies you have to understand, which is in Judaism, which is why Judaism fails completely with teaching people Kashrut, is in Judaism, one of the false things that are being taught is the fact of this progressive change happened. They think that the laws of Kashrut were given in Mount Sinai, which is not true. The laws of Kashrut were given from the very beginning when animals were permissible to eat, which was all the way back in the days of Noah. Adam knew of the animals that were considered kosher, but they didn't touch them to physically eat them or do anything specifically because meat was not permissible. So we have to understand this. The complexities of what goes on is the lack of knowledge of Torah. And one of the biggest things as to why you find in Judaism being falsely taught is Jews teaching people that they can eat unkosher animals. You can't tell a Gentile, say, oh, you're allowed to eat pig, oh, you're allowed to eat gopher, or you're allowed to eat, snakes and snails. These are all forbidden things all over the world. And the reason why is it's not being taught properly is because of this very thing, because they say, oh, it says the children of Israel. Theology is wrong, and we can understand why. If we go into reading in Vayikra later on, when it talks about the laws of Yom Kippur, the Bible tells us, speak unto the children of Israel, okay? And we will learn this here, okay? I'm going to flip just for a second here. I'm going to quickly jump the gun and go forward just for 1 second. When going into the issues of Yom Kippur, right? So the Bible tells us in Yom Kippur that when Moses is telling Aaron that these are the sacrifices that he's going to perform, and he's the Kohen HaGadol, Aaron is, right? That he says this, he says, to atone for the congregation of Bnei Israel, right? And when we learn from these very things that the Bible says here, and the very verse that we find here, is starting in, this is Tet Zayin, which is going to be 16 verse Hey. It says, Ume'et Adat Ben Israel, and from the congregation of the children of Israel, Yikach Se Seir Ezim, ye shall take a goat, the chatat for a sin offering, Ayil Echad La'olah, and one ram for a burnt offering, okay? And then when it goes down to talking about the sin offering, it says, and you shall draw it near, let me get to the passage, okay, 1 second here, jumped the gun with myself here, okay, it says in verse Tet Zayin, right, so Tet Zayin is 16, verse 16, we're going to be looking at, it says, the kiper al hakodesh, and it shall atone upon the holy things, me tumult, and from the tumult. What is tuma? Most people translate this word as unclean, and this is not correct, and I'll tell you why. The word tuma comes from the word tamah. All right, tamah means to make something unclean. Okay, so why do people say it's uncleanliness, right? Well, the real word in its truth is not really to make something unclean. That's really the wrong way to translate it. The word tameh literally should be translated, if you really want a real hardcore, correct understanding of tameh, it literally means to impart impurities, or to impart contaminants, or to impart filth. You have to understand this. Because the word tameh teaches us two things. Number one, it teaches us that it creates sickness within us by giving us things that we don't want to have, right? And it makes us in the context of spiritually impure, because the context of spirituality, remember that spirituality is not just like this this terminology that you normally hear people say. They kind of like abuse the word because they don't understand what they're saying when they say, oh, this is spiritual. The word spiritual in its form means that something is going on that's happening in a physical form. That physical form could be mental collapse. Your brain is going into a complete depravity of state where instead of being healthy mentally, you're unhealthy mentally. Spiritually could also mean the context of the physical things that are happening, the enemy trying to come against people, the attacks that the enemy tries to do against the world. Spiritual is very important because it takes upon real physical formats of it. We don't want to look at it as just like this kind of like this what you going to say, like this highfalutin kind of like terminology that's kind of like ooh kind of like thing where, you know, almost like when a person tries to think of like, you know, UFOs, aliens kind of stuff, where it's like they don't know how to put the context of things, right? And I say this in the sense of like, you know, when we think of angels, right? The first thing we might think of is, well, I don't see it, right? And therefore, because we think of that, I don't see it, we think of this is kind of like we call spiritual, right? Well, actually, it's just, it's real, it's physical. Just because our eyes do not have the moment of physically seeing something at the moment doesn't mean it's not physically there. It doesn't mean it's not physically real, okay? So the context that we learn from the word tameh is the word tameh doesn't mean to be like spiritually impure in the sense of like, oh, it's just like a spiritual thing, it's not physical. This is completely wrong. If you eat something unclean, it makes you physically sick and it makes you mentally ill. Those are the things you have to think of. So when somebody says, oh, that guy is spiritually like lost, it means that he's mentally gone crazy and the person has gone in crazy directions. That's the opposing order of what the Torah says. And that's what we have to realize and understand this, okay? So when the Torah says here, to atone, okay, okay, 16, right? So it says, the Kippara Kodesh, to atone upon the holy things, mitamot from the mitamot. So the mitamot is the holy things is what? So we're seeing that Yom Kippur is about really restoring everything to its correct order. So that means the obedient ways of living, the obedient context of functioning, the obedient actions of how things were to be done and carried out in the temple, all of these things. So the contaminations means whatever the Kohanim had at some time throughout the year screwed up, it was being rectified. It was being brought back into order. Whatever things of the children of Israel had gone astray in regarding to their not keeping of Torah, it was being rectified and it was being corrected, okay? So the Tuma in this context would literally mean like all of the emotional, mental, physical actions of the people and of the things that were to be understood in its correct form. It was being brought back into correction so that these things were not anymore stuck in this like destructive state. He says, Bnei Israel, B'mishbahem, and by their acts of defiance, okay, Shehem, V'kol Chatam, and all their sins, V'ken Yaseh, and thus it will be done, La'ohel Moed, for the tent of meeting, Hashochen Itam, who dwells with them, B'tuch tumotam, in the midst of their contamination. So the contamination, remember, this is not referring to contamination in a spiritual sense, like the way people present it, okay? Where they try to say, oh, if you eat pig, it's only a spiritual thing. It's not a physical thing. That's not true. The context here is talking about the aspects. When we're talking about spirituality, remember that I said that that word, it's perverted because people are not utilizing it in the real context. Anything that is spiritual is really physical, and we have to realize that, okay? So when a woman, for example, is nida, she is physically unclean. She's physically unhealthy, okay? And when she washes, that unhealthiness is washed off of her. It's removed from her, okay? And so that means that, we have to look at it, from that point of view of understanding it, okay? Is that tuma is making it unhealthy. It's making it, the person in a sick form. That's why even the Bible refers to a woman who's nida as being sick, okay? That she is ill. She's losing blood. She has ailments that affects her. She physically goes through things that affects her. She feels these things, okay? So when the Torah is talking about Israel being atoned, we learn from the Torah that the Torah talks about how the atonement is happening, and it tells us here that the two groups that we find that are being atoned on this day is the native and the Izrach. So the native and the Izrach, well, the Izrach is the one who's the native, the Izrach, I said native and Izrach, I didn't mean it. The Izrach and the Ger, right? So the Izrach is the native one who's a part of Israel, who's physically of the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the Ger is the one who has attached himself to walking and keeping God's commandments. It doesn't mean that this person is a convert. The word ger in this context is used in reference to the Gentiles who've walked away from paganism, okay? And so when the Torah is talking about this very thing, when it talks about the atonement and it talks about the bringing of the restoration and the bringing of the people back into a healing, a unity, and being purified, the Torah tells us in the passage here in Vayikra that this blood, when it's being atoned, that both the ger and the Izrach are being purified of all of the contaminations. And the Bible tells us that the ger and the Izrach are considered Bnei Israel. And that's why we know that the children of Israel, as is spoken of in this passage here in Yom Kippur, that it's speaking about, is referring to both the Jew and the Gentile. And that it's so important to understand this and stuff, because when we look at the passages, as many people struggle with, they don't understand that when it comes to Kashrut, Kashrut is something that is applied to both Jews and Gentiles. It's not something that is only for the Jew. It's applied to both the Jew and the Gentile. And this is why it's so important to be able to understand that when people want to understand the Torah and want to understand what's going on here, a lot of times people get caught up in the fact it says Bnei Israel, and they get confused with it. And they think, well, because it says Bnei Israel, it must mean that this is only for Israel. And this is where the falsehood stems from, is that belief and that incorrect terminology and the incorrect thinking and stuff. And that's because they're not looking at the fact that when the Torah talks about how that the sin offering of Yom Kippur is given, that it's given on behalf of both the Jew and the Gentile. And so in the passage, if you want to look at it, it's 16 verse 29. It says, Vayata lechem lechukat, and it should be for you for a statute olam b'chodesh hashivi, in the 7th month, be'eseh lechodesh tanu, on the 10th of the month you shall afflict ed nafshotechem, your souls. So you, meaning plural, shall afflict your souls. Kal malacha, every going to work, lo ta'asu, you should not do. Ha'izrach, the native, V'hager, and the stranger Hagar b'tochachem, who sojourns with you. So we know that the Torah is telling us that Jews and Gentiles are considered Bnei Israel. This is why even Paul even says this, that when a Gentile walks away from his paganism and he attaches himself to the Torah, that he becomes a part of Bnei Israel. Now, what I mean by Torah, I don't mean the covenant of Moses. I'm meaning the teachings and the commandments that are given to us in the Torah. Because remember, there's a separation of Jew and Gentile because the covenant of Moses is different than regular life, okay? And the covenant of Moses is dealing with the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, all right? And so that's why it's so important to understand this. So when we read here in this passage of Vayikra chapter 11, Bnei Israel is in this context referring to Jews and Gentiles, okay? And so this is why it's so important to encourage your Gentile buddies you have out there that you know to not eat unkosher food, okay? Because why? Because it says, as we read, it says, Dabru el Bnei Israel, speak unto the children of Israel. So if you are a believer in the Lord, a believer in Mashiach Yehoshua, and you are doing things to keep the Torah, you are of the children of Israel. So just remind yourself two major things, which is contradiction to everything you're going to see in Judaism. Number one, Shabbat was not given to Israel. Shabbat was given to Adam. Number two, Kashrut was not given to Israel. Kashrut was given to Noah. Noah was told all of the specific laws of what animals they could physically eat and what animals they couldn't eat. And those animals they could only eat were the ones that we know are kosher. The kosher meaning fit, okay? Meaning this is fit for consumption, all right? So anybody who wants to sit there and say, Gentiles cannot keep the Sabbath, you're teaching a lie. Anybody who wants to say Gentiles are not to eat kosher or they don't have to eat kosher, that's also teaching a lie. Gentiles are required to eat kosher. And this is one of the biggest reasons as to why you see that the enemy strives really hard to get people caught up in eating pork, eating shellfish, eating all the crap and stuff that's just going to defile people, make them sick. A lot of times people say, well, I don't see people really die or get really, hurt from eating pork or something like that. What does that mean? Well, the Torah wants us to understand something here. And actually, it's funny. I was reading a book by a gentleman. I think it's John. I think it was his name. I'm trying to remember. I think his name is John. Jonathan or John. I think his name is John. He's a actual wild edible. He's like I don't know if he's like a botanist and stuff, but he definitely focuses on biology and stuff. And biology, I like that. Biology. I make up words all the time, don't I? I'm just kidding. Anyways, he says in the book and stuff, which I thought was very, important to hear, because it's how people view things that makes it really destructive, the way that people don't think. That poisons, there are two types of poisons. There's fast reaction poisons and there's slow over time poisons. The fast reaction poisons are the ones that most people sit there and say, oh, I got sick, I threw up, I must have ate something wrong, okay? John Callis, this is it. This is the book, John Callis, Wild Edible Plants, right? So he talks about, in the book, he says that, people, a lot of times when they think of eating wild edibles, they get caught up in this false mentality of thinking, well, because I ate some and I didn't get sick, I must be fine. It must be edible, right? And this is where he says, no. This is the problem, you see. There are two types of, there's the poisons that are fast reacting, and then the poisons that will be something that will happen over time. And the fast reacting ones are the ones that you immediately feel the response. Oh my gosh, I don't feel so good. I'm going to throw up. I got a fever. All these other crazy things start happening. The slow reacting poison is different. These are the poisons where when you begin to eat it, it could take months, it could take years before the manifestation of that poison starts to take precedence in your body. And this is why it's so important to understand that people eating shellfish and pork and all of the things that we're going to be reading about that are forbidden, that why you don't see people just respond physically, quickly, immediately to the action of eating these things is because the poison that's in these animals is a slow off poison. And he even talks about this in his book where he says some poisons, it might be that if you ate something within 6 months or within a week, your body is able to work through it and then eventually, is able to dispose of all of the elements or contaminants that came with it. Other poisons, it might take years and it might not even be reversible. It might be this irreversible approach. And that's what you have to think about, right? Is some poisons affect us and we feel immediate responses. Some poisons affect us, we change our eating habits, and because of the change of eating habits, over time our body's able to get rid of the garbage that was in us. And other times, you could be having way too much contaminants that you've been eating, and to the point where it just makes you full on sick, and that's just it. It's irreversible, the sicknesses that are going on and stuff, right? And so the Torah tells us, this is why it's so important. The Torah tells us here about, that when it says here, it says, Zot chaya, these are the animals, asher techlu, which you shall eat, mechola behema, from all of the animals, asher al haaretz, that are upon the earth. Kol mafreset parasa shosat seisha, parasa ma'alat gera. So any that is dividing hoof, that splits, that splitted hoof animal, and the split means it has two separate hoofs, okay? Malat gera, and gives up its cud. The word garar merely means to regurgitate. That's one thing you need to understand. The word comes from to regurgitate. So it literally means that it regurgitates its food. So it eats it not once, but again and again, okay? Behema, among the animals, ota'it tachlu, you shall eat. Right? So if an animal is regurgitating up its food and it has two separate hooves, this is a sign of kosher, which means it's a sign of it being fit, right? Doesn't mean that it's absolutely finished, because the outside is also compared to the inside. And we learn from the inside. When we go and read earlier and stuff, the Bible says that if the kidneys, or if it has problem with the heart, if there's problems with the other organs and stuff, it's not fit for consumption. So we know from the Torah that there's a qualification of both the outer, the exterior, and also the inner, the interior. Okay? So it says, Ad ze lo tachlu, but this you should not eat. Milat gera, from those who lift up its cud, so that's who regurgitates its food. Mifrasa harafasa et gamal, so the splitting of the hooves of the camel, ki malat gera, for it lifts up its cud, so it regurgitates its food. V'hu parasa eninu mafris, but the hoof, it's not splitting, which means it won't split. So it may look like, but it won't, right? That's why the Torah tells us that the gamal is forbidden, because his foot will not split, right? Then it says, Temeh hu lechem. So temeh means what, right? This is where we have to say, we can't say it means unclean, right? We're going to change that definition. It doesn't mean unclean. It means it is impure. It is contaminant. It is filth to you. That means it will make you sick. This is what the Bible is telling us, that this animal, eating it, will make you sick. And how it makes you sick? Well, it depends on all the different contaminants that are in that animal that will do what and what. Will it cause kidney disease, liver disease, skin disease, respiratory disease? That's the question. What will it cause? What will the thing do? The point we have to see here is this. It will make you sick, okay? So one of the biggest fallacies that unfortunately is taught within the survival food and survival communities, when you see people, I'll never forget when I was a kid, and I'd be sitting there watching these videos, and then they'd be like, if you have to survive in the wilderness, you can take these worms and eat them. And I'd be like grossed out, because I'd be like, that's the most ugliest, disgustingest thing. Like, I would never eat that. That is so gross. Well, good to know the Torah says you don't eat them, right? So we see from the fact that, there's just this perversion, this twisted, it's a satanic thing that people are being literally, force-fed in videos and movies and whatever and stuff, to make people think that, everything goes down, if everything just goes really haywire and just horrible and stuff, you start eating bats and rabbits and squirrels and you just eat anything that walks, all right? And this is not true, right? The Torah tells us, no, this is not true. This is not what we do, right? So the next thing it says, Et shafan ki malat gera, for shafan is an animal. Matter of fact, you can see these in Israel. It's really funny because when you look at them from the appearance, you would think, oh, that looks like kind of like almost like a mixture between, I want to say kind of like a guinea pig, kind of like a mixture of like maybe a wombat. I mean, it's a hamster kind of like thing. It's a small little thing, but when you look at his feet, you'd be like, oh my gosh, I never would have thought this thing would have had little hooves. Because it just, you think a little crawling feet and stuff, but this thing has hooves. You're like, whoa, that's crazy, right? So it says, Parasa lo yifris, the hoof will not split, right? So they have one that the hoof doesn't split and the hoof will not split, right? Tamehu lechem, unclean it is to you. Ve'et arnevet, so the rabbit, ki malat gera, for it regurgitates its food, he, parasa lo yifris, but the hoof it didn't split. So we have one that doesn't split, the one that will not split, and the one that didn't split. Okay? Temei, unclean, who it is lechem to you. So once again, eating rabbits is not a survival food because it imparts impurities. You will get sick, okay? You will literally get sick eating those things. They're not good for you. So you stay away from these things. They're not food, all right? Et chazir, the pig, ki mafris parasa, who, for splitting its hoof, it does. B'shosha seisa parasa, so okay, it has a split hoof. It definitely has a separate hoof of two separate hoofs you see on the foot. Hu gera lo yigar, but the gera, which is the cud, right? It doesn't regurgitate its food, right? Tamehu lechem, unclean it is to you. So one of the biggest things we learned from the pig is that pigs are horrible, nasty animals, and they themselves were created to give us a picture and understanding of really what it is they do, right? Because they can eat, but the contaminants go straight in their body. The reason why they have such a simple stomach means that whatever they eat, they can't even purify it. That's one thing you have to understand. They can't, their body can't. So that's why you see parasites are very common and they're breeders of parasites in their meat. That's why you can actually like find worms and different things. People that have eaten pigs, they get worms and stuff. One woman, she was talking about this. I remember in a video where she was, I think she was in California somewhere, but she was Hispanic, and she said that she had eaten a pig for years. And one year, all of a sudden, she started to go like dizzy, and she started to feel weird and funky. Well, they found that this worm was in her brain. Literally, they had to literally take the worm out of her brain, and you just gross by it. And it was like they knew they could identify that it was come from pork meat because only that specific worm is found, which is a parasite. Now, understand this. What's a parasite? Okay, parasites are things that live on a living host. Okay, so that means they're bugs that live on animals. Okay. And they live on animals, and so those animals carry bugs, period. That's just their home, all right? And so the Bible tells us this stuff. This is another reason why you don't eat these animals is because of this. It's crazy when you watch people in the survival community sitting there talking about eating rats and stuff or eating some squirrel out there. And these guys are parasite holders. Like they literally carry parasites such as the flea that gave off the whole bubonic plague that came from a rat. I mean, shows you just how disgusting. And, it bothers you when you read some survival book and you're looking at it and they're telling people in World War II and stuff that, like, well, if you want to get rid of the fleas and stuff, just hang the rat out because it only lives on a living, not a dead. So if the rat's dead, then leave it out for a while, and then the fleas will fall off of it and stuff because they can't live on it. They'll die, right? And you're just like, this is so disgusting. I mean, the fact that they're trying to convince these guys to go to this degraded state where they're like literally eating rats and then trying to like find ways to like, what can you do with the flea issues or whatnot? But this is what happened. The bubonic plague became one of the major plagues that we find that really hit hard. And matter of fact, one of the things that you find with regard to the issue of what carries these kind of pestilences is war. One of the time that we find that I was actually reading a book about parasites, specifically about the flea that actually is used to would cause the whole bubonic plague thing, is it actually was found in all of the major wars. Filth and disgusting, like the trenches that happened during World War One. They were found multiple people had gotten the disease and stuff because of that time period. It's just horrendous. But it's like these animals live in filth. They dwell in filth. Pigs are known to be filthy animals for themselves. And just one of the major reasons why you just go, nope, nope, nope. I'm not going to eat that, right? So it says, Mi basaram, from their flesh, lo tachlu, you shall not eat. So it's telling us very carefully not to eat their flesh, right? V'niv latam, and their carcasses, lo tiku, you shall not touch. So their carcasses, which means their dead bodies, do not touch, right? So that means that they do give off, as it says, tamim ham lechem, unclean they are to you, right? So an animal such as a dog or such as a cat and stuff, when they die, they actually emanate, and this is what we find, they emanate uncleanlinesses that comes out of them, okay, and makes us sick. So that's why the Torah tells us about lo tigu, you should not touch, because these things emanate these things. So that's why you have to be very careful when you deal with the animals and stuff with sickness and things, if they die and stuff, because nivlata, we're talking about this is the carcass of a dead animal. Et ze tochlu, this you shall eat, michol asher b'mayim, in the water, kol asher lo, all that has sanafir v'kashkeshet, so whoever has fins and scales, b'mayim, in the water, b'yamim, and in the ocean, b'nehalim, and in the rivers or the streams, otam, them tochlu, you shall eat. V'kol ein asher lo, but whoever does not have sanafir kashkeshet, fins and scales, b'mayim, in the water, b'nivlatam, b'nachalim, sorry, in the rivers or the streams, Michol sheretz hamayim, from all that themes in the water, Michol ge nefesh chaya, from all the living souls, Asher b'mayim, that's in the water, Sheketz him lechem, it's an abomination to you, right? So shechetz is a very powerful word, and this is what it's talking about because of the importance of understanding that when it's talking about abomination, it means like there's so much filth in these things that it's going to really, really get you in a lot of sicknesses. And it can affect you in so many different ways. This is why you have to think about it. If somebody goes and says, oh, I'm going to eat a squid, right? Well, do you have any idea like what psychological effects that eating that squid is going to do to you? Most people really don't pay attention to this stuff. And they think, oh, it's not going to be that big of a deal. It can't be that big of a deal. But it does. Anything that is eaten that is unclean causes psychological, physical effects. Why? Because you have to think biology, right? The minute you eat something, it goes into your stomach. Your stomach breaks it down and then starts taking that and starts bringing it all into your organs and into your body. And of course, one of the first things it's going to go to is what? The blood. Your blood system takes it to your brain. So bang, what do you think you're doing? You're getting affected by it. Whatever stuff is in this stuff. Why, you ever notice like when you've been really starving and you've been really hungry, right? And you're just like, oh my gosh, like I have this weird headache. You eat food, all of a sudden poof, the headache goes away, right? And they say that this specifically is what? It's one of those food headaches, right? Like it's just your body needing food, right? Well, if food we know affects our head, right? Then why aren't we thinking about contaminants? affecting our head. Contaminant food affecting their brain. Contaminant food affecting our thinking. All right. This is telling us why we need to be very careful with contaminants that cause effects of our mind and body. Right. So anything that doesn't have fins and scales in the water, it is an abomination. Et ele, these, takshku min ha'of, these you abominate from the birds, lo yichul, that you may not eat, shechetz him, abomination they are, et hanesher, so the eagle, vit peres, the vulture, et hazinya, the black vulture, vit da'a, the red kite, Et ayah, the black kite, lamineha, according to its kind. Vet kol orev, any raven, laminehu, according to its kind. Vet bat, ayadna, the ostrich. Et hatachmas, the nighthawk. Vet shachaf, the seagull. Vet natsef, hanetz, the hawk, laminehu, according to its kind. Vet hakus, the little owl, ve'et hashalach, the offspring, het ayin ashuf, the great eagle, or the great owl, excuse me, ve'et hatin neshet, I don't know why I'm screwing up today, but anyways, I'll get back to this. Ve'hit nashemet, the barn owl, ve'et ka'at, the pelican, ve'et racham, and the Egyptian vulture, et chasida, the stork, ha'nafa, the heron, lamina according to its kind, ve'et adukhifat, the hoopoe, ve'et atalef, the bat, ve'kol sheretz, all sheretz ha'of, all the swarming of the birds, ha'olech, that walk al arba, upon all four, shechetz hu lechem, an abomination it is to you, right? Now, all of these birds have one thing majorly in common, right? You know what that is? They walk with four little toes, right? So if you look in the front, they got their front three claws and they got their left claw in the back. So it's one thing they have in common. Number two, they all eat dead things and they all attack living things. So you see eagles, they go after a fish. I mean, I remember the other day I was just eating with my wife and stuff. We were watching this bird came down, just took off and just kept flying away and had that fish right in his claws, all right? So these are the things we have to see that they have this in common, is the very things of what they do. Now, basically, we see here in the fact of, we know that the major part that you have to look at this is these characteristics we see here with regard to these birds, all right? Then it says, Ach itzei, only this, tachli shalit michal sheretz, ha'of, from all the teemings of the birds, which means sheretz always has to do with large multitudes, all right? So birds that are, ha'of is a generic term for any flying animal, just so you know that. It doesn't necessarily mean bird in itself. It comes from the word afaf, which means to fly, okay? So this is basically any winged animal, ha'olech. So here we're going to be learning about grasshoppers. Va'al arba, that walks upon all four. Asher lo karaim, which has karaim, jumping legs. Mi'al raglav, from upon its feet, right? So it's foot that has, so it has a knee. Karaim is the leaping thing of the knee that it has. Mi'al raglaim, upon its feet. So it has basically, if you look at a grasshopper, it has like 3 basic feet, right? And the last one, it has the karaim, which is that knee appendage part that goes, and the big leg is nice and thick. It's able to leap. That's why it says, lenater, to leap by them, al haaretz, upon the earth. Et ele mehem, from these, tafu, you shall eat. So of all the things, these are the only bugs that are permissible to eat. And it's because they leap, they jump, right? And because also they have other characteristics that the Bible tells us about, right? So it says, arba, the red locusts, these are actually found during famines. They will actually go and eat massive crops. We find this in Shemot, when the arba came down and they were eating all of the different vegetation. Lemonehu, according to his kind. The word arba literally comes from the word rava, means to multiply, right? And that the ve'et salam, the yellow locust, salam, this literally comes up to means to swallow up. It's actually the root word, salam. Leminihu, according to Iskayim, ve'et hargol, and the spotted gray locust. So the spotted gray locust, leminihu, according to Iskayim, ve'et Chagav, and the white locust leminihu. Chagav means to conceal, right? So it kind of has a camouflage kind of essence to it. Leminihu, according to his kind. V'kol sheret sa'uf, and all of the swarming of the flying animals, or flying creatures, you could say, because remember, off doesn't literally just mean just animals, it means anything that flies, right? Asher lo arba raglaim, that has 4 legs, shechitzu lechem, unclean it is to you. So that means any flying creature. So we're talking bees, wasps, all those kind of animals, or creatures and stuff. They have 4 legs. They're unclean. The only thing that makes the locust clean is because it has the leaping leg and the appendage, and because it's able to leap off of the earth, that identifies it. And then we have the 4 specific families of the locusts that are edible. And these things, the Bible says, you can eat during the times of famine. It's actually what was eaten when we read about Yochanan the prophet, that he ate locusts. Okay, and let's see, here we are. Le'ele temotu, and these you become unclean. Kol anogeh, whoever's touching banivlatam at their carcass, yitamei ad erev, should become unclean until evening. Kol noseh banivlatam, whoever is lifting minivlatam at their carcass, yikabes, shall wash begadav, his garment. So the Torah tells us that it gets into the clothing. You have to actually physically wash the clothing, right? If you lift up these animals, right? Tamei ad erev, and the person becomes unclean until evening. So he has to wash his clothing. He would have to immerse before sunset. And then when the sun sets fully and goes down, then he becomes no longer tamei. That's why it says tamei ad erev. Kol behema, all the animals asher he mafresa farsa, that has the hoof, shesa, dividing, enenu shosat, that is not splitting, gera, a cud, enenu malat, that does not lift up its cud, so it doesn't regurgitate its fruit, tamim, unclean, or we can learn this, we sit here and say that it's not just unclean, it's what? Contaminated. It is unfit for consumption. It is filled with diseases. It's filled with different contaminants. It's filled with filth, right? So, tamim hem lachem, kolon negea benivlatam, whoever touches at their carcass, yitamei ader, should be unclean until evening. Oh, sorry, I forgot to read the part. V'kol holech al kapav. So whoever walks upon its paws. So obviously, whoever walks upon its paws, that's your bears, that's your cougars. You can go on and list dogs, and just keep going forward. So now you can look at this and stuff and say that, there is nothing manly about cutting and killing a bear and eating its meat. That's not manly at all. It's disgusting. These animals are filled with filth, and they're horrible. Matter of fact, one of the things you can think about that's really interesting, especially if you actually do some studying upon, like a bear, for example. What makes interesting, like what makes a bear and like a lion, what makes these two characteristically animals interesting about their character? Why is it not just from a physical standpoint, but from a characteristic standpoint, this animal becomes very unkosher? A male bear only mates with a female and then takes off. And the female's left to raise the kids all throughout her time period. So she goes into the den, and she goes through the whole time period of her pregnancy. She conceives and has the bear cubs. And then afterwards, she physically goes and she raises the bear cubs and teaches them. It takes about up to 2 years time period where she physically reaches the point where she's given them enough ability for them to know how to function and be. And they start going off on being on their own. What's funny about this stuff too is the fact that another thing about bears is a female bear, if she sees that her cub is not healthy, she'll abandon it, which is another aspect of it that shows you how such a characteristical trait of this is just disgusting, right? Which you see this characteristic trait about the vulture. Vultures eat dead things, right? They eat things that are just filled with just death, right? And it lives off of something that's been decaying and dead and laying out there, okay? A lion, for example, a lion has, paws, as we see in this passage where it talks about halach al kapav, right? A lion, the way lions function is also weird and interesting at the same time. It's weird because it's like, when you think about it from a human standpoint, you think, wow, that's really graphic about how this characteristic of lion is. When you think about it from a animalistic point of view, you think, how graphic this is and stuff because of the way it functions, right? So a lion will actually go mate with the actual female and have a litter, right? It seems fine and dandy. The litter stays with it and stuff. However, here's the thing. If a lion wants to become a ruler of another clan, it will kill all the cubs first so that nothing stands in opposition to it in order to take over that new clan. And this is when you start looking at this and realizing the fact of like, wow, that's disgusting. And it shows you this concept and stuff about like, these are very, similar to what you find with some of the garbage behaviors you've seen within a lot of wicked people out there, like Nero, where he slaughtered and killed his family and stuff, which is gross, right? Or you think about people and stuff who they just sleep with a woman, get her pregnant, but ditch her, and then she's stuck raising the kid all by herself. And you start looking at these things, you start realizing stuff like, wow, the Bible's telling us characteristical things that we need to be aware of and think of and look at these things as like, this is not clean. This is not derogatory behavior. The animals the Bible speaks about that we can eat, we notice that there's a big thing we see they all have in common. Number one, we look at the salmon, for example. There's two types of salmons, okay? There's one salmon that goes and spends its whole life going up, mating, and then the female spends the rest of its time going all the way up to the top of this area where she's going to lay her eggs, and then once she's done her job, she dies, right? Which means the whole fulfillment of that salmon is to restore a generation of new offspring, right? Another type of salmon, there is a difference. This type of salmon goes and multiplies more than once. It will go up and lay eggs, go back, get pregnant again, go up and lay eggs before it dies, right? And so the concept we find this and stuff is like, we hear all the stories and stuff when we learn about, salmon and stuff and how they go upstream. They go opposite of everything. They go and fight the actual stream itself. And their whole job is to push upstream rather than going downstream. Like, that's the amazing thing that look at salmon, right? And when you think about the characteristics of the kosher animals like the lamb, you think about cows, they're docile animals, right? That doesn't mean they can't have a temper, right? We know that animals can have tempers and stuff, but they're very docile. They're very much submissive. And that's the thing we find from the Torah is the Torah is teaching us to be submissive, to be a submissive person, to be a very humbled, docile person, to learn to accept being told to do things and go here and go there. And we see that from what the Torah teaches us in this, right? And this is the beauty of what we find is that, the Torah is not just telling us and stuff, be healthy, right? But the Torah is giving us attributes to look at and think about. What is the characteristic of this animal? What is the characteristic of this animal? Like, I remember and stuff like when I was a little kid, when I was really curious. I think I was like 5 years old, maybe 4 and stuff. And I saw a little bird nest, and I saw a little bird chirping and stuff, and I wanted to check it out. And I showed my mom and said, "Hey, Mommy, look at the baby." And my mom first said to me, "Oh, you should never have done that, sweetie. Why'd you do that?" And I said, "Well, I saw the baby. I wanted to show you." She's like, "Yeah, but the mother will never, ever take it back." And she was right. I put it back in the nest. the mother never took that bird back. And you look at this and you think to yourself like, wow. And, this was an unkosher bird species that does this. And it shows the fact that, like, how many times have we heard of things where, mothers abandon their children? They walk away from their children. They don't love them like they're supposed to. They're not taking care of them like they're supposed to. It's like they just kind of turn off the emotion and just walk away. And these are the things that Torah says don't be, right? Tells us not to be like these things, and tells us don't eat these things, right? Because why? Because this is whatever holechet al arba upon all four tamehim lechem, unclean these are to you. So these things are going to make us contaminated. They're going to make us sick. They're going to put filth and contaminants in our body. Kol nagia baniv latam. Whoever touches at the carcass, yitamei adir, should be unclean until evening. Hanoset it nivlatam. Whoever lifts up their carcass, yikabes begadav, shall wash his garment. V'tamei adir, and should be unclean until evening. Tamehim lechem, unclean these are to you. We're going to continue on tomorrow as we go into the secondary section of the issues of Kashrut. But I wanted to really just emphasize the importance of just thinking about how important it is to understand that the word tameh does not mean unclean like the way you've been taught, but rather it means to impart impurities, to impart contaminants. And that's why eating an animal that's been slaughtered improperly, or eating an animal that does not follow the characteristic traits of kosher, meaning fit, right, will impart impurities to you. And it's interesting because, when you actually get more involved in reading and studying stuff like herbivology and stuff, and you want to learn about wild edibles and things, there's always a crazy side, right? You got the crazy spirituals that like trying to turn it into some witchcraft, crazy garbage stuff. And then there's the logical side where it's like, if I eat this, it will help my immune system, like taking pine needles, boiling it, and then you drink from that juice. It has more vitamin C in it than normal actual oranges have, okay? But when you look at these things and you hear about how they talk about how making sure that when you're going to use, a pine needle, or if you're going to eat a tomato or something of that nature and stuff, any of the plants that we eat and stuff, right? Get the freshest, get the most healthiest one to use it. Well, that's the same thing the Torah says with regard to meat, right? It doesn't say, if its eyes like, kind of funky over here and it's got some weird scab on the head, just don't worry about it. The Bible says don't eat it. The Bible says if it doesn't fit all the criteria of being completely edible, then don't eat it. And that's when we have to think about this and stuff. When we look at the fact of like how we want to be and how we need to increasing ourselves and be is seeking to do everything to be a healthy person, to seek a healthy life spiritually, to learn the Torah, to put in our heart, to, chew our cud in the Torah, to regurgitate what we learn in the Torah, to keep regurgitating it, to remove contaminants and stuff, because, what does food naturally do? Like, we eat food, and it removes contaminants that are in our body, right? Our body is the big thing that, God made to naturally push away contaminants. I mean, just like when you see, like, people, like, it's interesting, like, I never understood, like, tattoos until later on, getting it and really understanding, what are tattoos? They're putting metals in your body in a thick form that your body can't break down. And so your body naturally, like, it's funny, like when you do get something metal in your body naturally starts to push it out because it's like, this is foreign matter, it doesn't belong here, let's get rid of it. But when a person puts like a tattoo in their body, right? Well, that tattoo is stuck because the body can't break it down. That's why if you look at a guy who's like 80 years old who had a tattoo in his 20s, it looks all deformed and nappy and stuff because it's taken almost 60 years of his life just to break down that much of the metal out of that part of the body. And what you see when you see people taking, for example, those lasers and they start popping the person's like arm with that laser beam and hitting it, it starts breaking down that metal, it starts breaking down all the contaminants and stuff so the body can sort of absorb it. And we see from the fact of, eating the right things, putting the right food in our body helps keep us healthy. keeps us safe and keeps us protected from the things. Being obedient and doing what's right. Hope you enjoy this time. I'll see you next time.